Okay, we're all set.
All right, so I'm gonna call the meeting to order at 5:12. It looks like there are a lot of people who have phoned in to listen to the meeting. So first of all, thank you very much for taking time out of your days to join this. And for those of you who are new, what we typically do with our meetings, we do not engage with people who are listening to the meetings during the actual meeting, but we do have time for public comment at the beginning of our meeting as well as at the end of our meeting. So I guess my first question is, we usually allocate about 10 minutes to public comment. If anyone has anything to say, and Randy, I don't know if you have any suggestions for how to identify who might want to speak up, but if anyone has any comments, if you could identify yourself and just let us know.
Yeah, so if anybody has public comment, you can, I think, just ask them to state their name, and we can go from there. And you've got 10 minutes, right? And Dean's on speaker, okay?
Dean is here.
Dean's on speaker.
I'm here. Hello.
Hey, Dean. Welcome.
I'm still trying to log into the Zoom. I don't know why my password link is dead.
Okay.
Hi, Dean.
Hi.
And Dean, just for your information, let me look. It looks like there's about 16 people on the line with us. Okay, so we're going to open it up for public comment.
Okay. Do we have any public comment? I will take that as a no. All right.
Jen, I'm going to ask people to mute themselves on their phones if they haven't done so already. That would be helpful for us as we're working through this.
All right. Next item on the agenda is, do I have a recommendation to approve the minutes?
Moved.
All right. I will second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any discussion? Any edits? I didn't have any.
No.
Okay. So I've moved that we recommend the minutes of our June 1st meeting as written. Second.
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 All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. Next item on the agenda is the report from the superintendent of schools.
Okay, so we scheduled this meeting specifically to provide an update and for discussion and possible action regarding increase in enrollment, unexpected increase in enrollment. So we divided the two agenda items on this topic into kind of two different categories: current enrollment and then a discussion about residency process. Okay, so I think it's probably easiest for us to try to keep the conversation to those two, kind of keep them within those two areas.
Okay.
So you can see, board members, we included in the packet from last week the anticipated numbers of students as of, I think you're typing, Dean. I'm going to mute you just for a second, okay?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's just, I'm just going to mute you while I'm talking, okay? So that showed that there was, we were looking at an increase of approximately 50 students. I sent you an updated list as of today, which is looking at 37 that came in this afternoon. As you know, it's very much a moving target. So on any given day, you can, the numbers change. So I'm putting out there for our discussion. You can see that I made a couple of recommendations here that are a starting point because we may want to do something different or consider any of these in isolation or in combination. So there's four areas that I'd like you to consider, and I'll run through all four of them, and then we can open up for discussion. So the first would be that we request that the legislator waive the penalty for the provision of the FY22 and FY23 budgets for all non-operating school districts. So the idea is that at this point, given what's happening in FY21, really one of the key things you're going to need as a non-operating school district is some legislative intervention here. And because the legislature is going back into session later this month, you have an opportunity you don't typically have. So the first one is to waive the penalty provision, which would certainly help. The second recommendation is that you request that the legislature make a statutory change by which the homestead tax rate reaches, by when the homestead tax rate reaches the non-homestead tax rate, both rates increase in unison to support the budget. Okay, and right now, currently, the non-homestead tax rate is held, it's held stable independent of what happens. And so the consideration to think about is if anybody owns property in a non-operating district, does it make sense to think about the fact that we know that, we understand that there's value, people move to the community of Winhall for specific reasons, and that all taxpayers in the community share the responsibility of students who move in, families that move in with children attending our schools or regional schools. The third thought to consider is requesting that the legislature set a tax rate maximum for non-operating school districts based on a percentage cap over the established budget. So the idea here is a cap. The number two option, it kind of insulates any non-operating school district within its community and doesn't impact any other local communities or other budgets in any other parts of the state. This one would. It would essentially be saying we're going to establish a cap. And once you reach that cap, there'll be some sort of a legislative response, and maybe the ed fund would cover the cost. I'm not sure. That would probably be left to the legislatures, but the idea that you couldn't go over a certain percentage increase. And the fourth consideration is reconsidering the definition of a resident as it relates to a homeowner owning multiple homes when taxpayers are employed out of state, or when one parent lives and works outside of the state. So we've got, later on you'll see we put the definition of residency in the packet, a resident in the packet, but do they start to tackle that and look at that differently as far as who actually is a resident of Vermont? So those are 4 starting points. And, I think I can turn it over to the board for discussion and further discussion on this topic and see if there's any action that you decide you want to take.
And I would actually like to add at least one option for us to discuss, which I can do now. Actually, why don't I go ahead and do it now, and then maybe we can sort of talk about everything together. I'm not sure I'm not sure if Winhall really fits into the parameters of the COVID relief that has been given to the state of Vermont by the federal government. But when you look at the numbers of families that we have moving to Winhall, and specifically the number of out-of-state families that are moving to Winhall, I think we have a pretty clear chain of causation that a lot of these families are moving here in response to the pandemic. And I think, this is definitely unprecedented. We've never, ever, ever experienced growth on this level at all. And I think, if there's a way that we could tap into some of those COVID funds, that would be an avenue to explore as well, because this is clearly, in my mind, related to the pandemic. And I think it's a special circumstance that, if there's funding that would be available for that, that might be a good option to explore.
I think we should send any and all of what we just talked about. I mean, we've been talking for years about how we don't fit the funding formula, and
right.
We've sort of just struggled on and tried to meet that challenge the best we can. But we're in a situation now where if it's never going to be more obvious how broken the funding formula is than right now.
Right.
So I think that we really need to push the legislature to do something, because we're never going to get a better opportunity than this to prove our point, which is that the funding formula makes almost no sense for a town like Winhall.
I agree. And I think all of these in some combination are probably a good option. The other thing too that I've really been struggling with over these past few days is a little bit of a chicken and an egg thing. I mean, we have to figure out what we're going to do, but in order to figure out what we're going to do, we need more information. And, you know, we don't have all of the information, but we need to start figuring out what we're going to do. And hopefully all of those pieces will kind of coalesce at the same time. So I think it makes sense to, you know, really explore all of these options as the situation evolves, but, you know, to have something in the works so that we can sort of play out different scenarios.
I would say to you that I know the Joint Fiscal Office is very aware of our situation, and I would say sympathetic. They are aware of the fact that you as a board have responded to previously challenging times, established a tax stabilization fund, been as fiscally responsible and forward thinking as you can be, and that the position that you find yourselves in is of no you know, it's not due to any decision making on your part. Kelly's probably on this call. Kelly Baea and I have had lots of conversations around this. I've spoken to other legislators, and people understand the situation. And I think that there would be, there's a likelihood of some level of response. But I do encourage you as a board to, you know, make a decision to take some action and over the next couple of weeks prior to the session opening.
Okay. And Randy and I have spoken about this. I've also spent a lot, I mean, I think Randy and I both spent a lot of time on the phone with different people talking about this. And I think, you know, a lot of people in the legislature are aware of Winhall. And I would agree, like, just from what I've heard, that, you know, this is not poor budgeting. This is something that certainly couldn't have been anticipated when we passed our budget in March, and, you know, definitely not when we approved it as a board last January. So I think exploring any and all options to try to find some relief. I mean, it's one of those things where, objectively speaking, if you looked at someone and said, hey, we had, you know, 50 some odd kids move into the area after we passed our budget because of the pandemic, I don't think anyone would think that it would be fair to, you know, pit us with the tax rate that would flow from that, particularly because if we weren't talking about the tax rate, I think you could hold Winhall up as a success story. You know, we are attracting new families to the area. We're bringing, you know, new energy into the economy. I think, you know, we have many, many things to be proud of. I think this has the potential to be a very good story, but I think we need to get around the tax issue first.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it goes beyond just the situation we find ourselves in this year. It's always a problem for us. Mm-hmm. And we need, if we were able to get some relief on this, a change to the funding formula, really any of the things we just discussed, it would not only help us with our very difficult situation this year, it would help us in all future years as well. And we find ourselves in this situation all the time when we have unexpected growth. It's just that the magnitude of the growth this year is pretty much unprecedented. So this is really something that's going to help us in the long run as well, if we can get something done.
Yeah, because it feels like when we're setting our budget, it feels like we're dancing on the head of a pin. And it's just, you know, we are so small that even a small increase in our numbers is enough to throw our budget out of whack.
Yep. I'm going to hop off the phone, Randy, because I was
Perfect.
able to get into the meeting.
I just admitted you.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
You know, one thing I do want to say is legislative is kind of one avenue that we could potentially pursue. But, you know, the second avenue that we could pursue is kind of going back and looking at affidavits and residency from what is within our control.
So I think that goes to the question of residency, which is the next. I think you're right, Meredith, but hold off on that until we finish with
the okay, got it, on it.
I would propose, I'm happy to continue conversations. I actually spoke with Kate Webb yesterday, who is the chair of the Ed committee. And I told her that we were meeting today and offered that I could follow up with her after our meeting and just start the conversation about, different scenarios, what has caused the issue that we're experiencing, and then as well as to start thinking about ways forward. And I'm happy to do that if you all want to authorize me to continue.
So I wonder about making a motion. I mean, so it sounds like that's a number 6, right? Is to connect with Representative Webb from the House Ed Committee.
Mm-hmm.
Can you guys hear me okay now that I'm on?
Yeah.
Okay,
There
great.
you go. You're on.
The one thing I do want to bring up that is of concern is, once we start kind of throwing the discussion of residency and homes, how do I phrase it? I think one of the things that is concerning is that the way that the fourth point was phrased and laid out, it was a little hazy to understand the intent of what was suggested in the fourth point that we want to potentially bring up to the legislature.
As far as the definition of resident, is that what you're?
Yeah, if you could maybe explain that a little bit further and explain kind of the intent behind that and kind of what you were trying to or what, that really means, that would be very helpful to me. I have my own interpretation of it, but it seems very hazy right now. And I'm concerned that the language in it may open up a larger can of worms.
And Randy,
Jen, do you want to respond to that?
Well, yeah, I'm trying to remember if you had this or if it was me. I mean, the way I'm reading this is that these are multiple situations. One is there an exception? Well, not exception, but does the definition of resident change when you've got a homeowner owning multiple homes, some within this state, some within another? My understanding of residency is you can only have one residency at a time. And you can change it, but you can only ever have one residency at a time.
But Jen, would that be 181 days spent as a resident in the home? Because for people who have second homes, it's confusing because they can definitely have their primary residence in the state of Vermont and then a second home somewhere else? Or are you suggesting in the language that people only own one home in the state of Vermont? So that's a part of it. It was when I read it, I interpreted a lot of different ways, and I'm a little nervous to send that up because, quite frankly, it's a little vague.
So, and I hear you. I think my concern that I articulated to Randy was when you've got a couple who's married, one has declared residency in Vermont, the other declares residency in a different state and continues to work in that other state. The Vermont resident typically doesn't earn an income, or maybe doesn't earn as much as the one that's working out of state. So you've got, and there are no tax money in that situation is flowing to the state of Vermont, and you've got a married couple, one a resident of one state, one a resident of another state. Is that sufficient to establish intent? Because if that spouse in Vermont is only declaring residency in Vermont for the time that his or her children will be educated in Vermont, is that sufficient to establish intent to be a resident? So I think that's really sort of the discrete scenario that I was thinking about.
Yeah. And
can I jump in for 1 second?
Yeah.
So my interpretation of that fourth point is that, and I'm just going to read really quick from the statute. Right now, my understanding is that the definition of resident for the purposes of getting the school voucher is more or less as follows. For the purposes of the resident of the state and of a school district, it means a natural person who is domiciled in the school district and who, if temporarily absent, demonstrates an intent to maintain a principal dwelling place in the school district indefinitely and to return there. And that's not a very strict definition of resident. That's
It is
that's
not.
pretty wide open. And I
Yeah.
think what the fourth point is trying to address is if the definition of resident that I just read, if that was to be elaborated on, and if there were to be more requirements to prove residency and maintain residency to be put in place, that would absolutely have an impact on our enrollment. And I think that's what the intent of 4 is to broaden the the statute and to be more specific about what it means to be a resident, because that tiny little paragraph is pretty easy to meet that standard.
I hear you, and I completely agree that I think that the definition of residency as it stands right now is very vague. But I
With
am,
the low bar. I mean,
yeah, I mean, quite frankly, it is. But once we start throwing in, I think it becomes difficult to control somebody's source of income, where they get their money, especially in COVID, especially because Vermont doesn't have a tremendous number of jobs and industry. So a lot of people who live here are employed by out of state companies,
Yeah, and I
including
would just add to
including
that.
my husband, who lives with me, who is employed by a company that's based in Boulder and Massachusetts, and clearly I'm a resident of Vermont. So I guess, and we file taxes in Vermont. So I understand the intent. I just am trying to I don't want to I just, it may be so broad that I think it just needs to be refined a little bit further, because I think you're kind of lumping all these people in together, and I'm not sure. What about if you move to Vermont and you have a job somewhere else and you're trying to sell your home in Long Island? Or what
Well,
if, so then you just don't get the voucher if you're trying to sell your home?
and I think that from my perspective, the idea of residency, there's a difference between my primary residence is out of state, and that is our primary residence, and we're here, right? We're paying taxes there. One of the partners works there, versus our residency is here. We're paying taxes in here, and that other location is the more temporary place. So it's the idea, as I think about it, is it comes back probably to homestead in a lot of ways. Where is your homestead? Where is your home? I think the last sentence in the statute that Dean just read, saying a person may only have one residence at a given time, the idea of a person, that's also difficult, right? And we can look at that. I know that if a home in another state is one domicile that's owned by a couple, and then or one member of a partnership, and then they purchase a second place in Vermont, it could be in not the partner that's residing here, but it could be held in the name of the partner who owns the out-of-state property as well. And then, and this is something that I do believe is already kind of something that's happening. So this person who's residing here, this partner, this parent who has a child or children here, does not actually have a residence in his or her name, because it's actually in their partner's name who's residing out of state.
Okay.
Okay. So it is incredibly confusing. It is it opens you up, as you know, for a lot of folks to say, hey, we've lived outstate. That's where we've lived our entire lives. We've had a second home here, or we've just felt like, hey, we want to be in Vermont because we're looking at what's happening there and it feels safer and like a better choice for my family. We don't want folks coming in to sort of take advantage of the opportunities here when they have full intent of returning back to their previous home once things have settled down and we're in a different place with the virus goes.
100%. And I hear you. I just, I understand what you're saying, and I don't necessarily disagree. I just think it's a little vague because of how it's worded. I don't have a solution, unfortunately, but I understand I understand but the fundamental issue is also then renters would fall under that category as well.
Not necessarily. I mean,
well, if you are domiciled, if you have a second home, let's say you rent a second home and you don't rent it in the spouse's name and they had, a child attend a school, it's the same situation as if you own it.
So are you, I mean, when I heard you say renter, I'm thinking, someone who's just, they don't even own a home anywhere. They're just renting to live. And I don't find that problematic at all. Are you talking about like someone who owns a house in another state, but they're renting a home in Vermont?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean,
can I jump in for 1 sec?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, again, that kind of goes
Go ahead,
back
finish
to
your
the question
thought,
of intent.
So I wonder if it just makes sense to leave it that, we're recommending that they reconsider the language around the term for resident and at some point engage with them in conversation.
I don't think she's keyed since
you're
11, but
it up.
Somebody's.
I know, I just muted them. So
yeah, I mean,
maybe it's the action is to request that the legislature can reconsider the definition of resident, and we leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I don't think we need to get into the weeds. I actually agree with Meredith. I think that it's a really slippery slope if we were to start suggesting how to change the definition, because there are tons of considerations you would have to take into account in order to change that in a meaningful way that's going to be fair and equitable to everyone.
And many of which we're not even aware of because that's not what we do.
Yeah, I mean,
I would just add that it also doesn't even just apply to people from another state. We have the same problem with people from 2 towns over, which we've dealt with in the past. So I wouldn't even, in the language, my suggestion would be to limit. I would maybe change the language in what we've written there to be less specific to out-of-staters. I don't want it to sound like we're being prejudicial. We have the same problem internally where people really live 2 towns over.
100%.
Yeah.
Right. So they've bought property in Winhall, they own property in Londonderry, and they're declaring, a smaller property in Winhall, and they're declaring that as their primary resident and taking the voucher when they live in Londonderry.
For example, yeah, hypothetically.
That's just an example.
That could happen. Yeah, but I think, I mean, I don't necessarily think we should get rid of point 4. I think we should suggest that they change that definition. I don't think we should get into the weeds as far as telling them what they should change it to. Maybe just suggest that potentially changing the definition in some way might alleviate the problem. I think the other 3 points are much more feasible and clear cut and would give us I think they'd solve the problem much more effectively. And I would hope that the legislature would go with one of those 3, but it certainly wouldn't hurt to suggest that they look at residency because it's certainly an issue.
Yeah. And as I said before, and I think, we're all in agreement here, I fully welcome new families to Winhall. I think we all do. And I think, again, I mean, it's great that we are one of the few towns in Vermont that continues to attract families that, kids grew up here, they have the Vermont experience, and I love that. I think what we're just trying to do as a board is make sure that the people who are declaring residency, filling out the paperwork are in fact residents. under the statute, as currently written, or, if that definition changes.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of got to the heart of it, which is that as a board, as a school board, and as a community, we want Winhall to be attractive to as many families and people in general as possible. We want to have a nice town that people want to live in. And it's very strange that our tax is structured in such a way that it disincentivizes us from wanting to attract as many people as possible. It doesn't make any sense. It's completely backwards.
Right.
So does somebody want to make a motion?
Yes. I move that was the suggestion to send a letter to the legislature with these suggestions for possible changes? Is that, am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, the recommendation is that the board follow up on these recommendations. You've made you would likely change number 4 to kind of cut it off after resident, and then we also had 2 other recommendations for actions around possibility of accessing COVID relief funds to help support some of the financial strain you're under, as well as connecting with Representative Webb from the House Ed Committee.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Then next item on the agenda is the residency process and any updates to that.
Yes. So I again came to you with 2 ideas as far as the residency process, and there's likely going to be a lot more discussion around this, but I wanted to put it on the agenda for discussion and to determine whether or not you wanted to make any changes to the process and the what you request of new families who are interested in enrolling their children. So I included our current declaration of residency form that we revised last summer, and recommendations to consider asking questions related to: if you're a homeowner, have you declared your property as your homestead? If not, when will this be completed? So the idea of, if you are wanting to enroll your child in a school and have the Winhall School District and be a resident of Winhall School District that pays for that, then you need to be living in your home as a homestead. It cannot be a secondary residence. So I'll put that out there, and you can open up for discussion, and we can go from there.
I like that idea a lot. I mean, I think that should be about the first question that we ask before we get to supporting documentation.
I agree.
One thing I would like to say is, should homestead be declared by a certain date?
Well, so the way it works is when you buy a property, it's on the property transfer tax form, whether or not you're declaring homestead at the time of purchase. And in fact, if you are declaring the homestead, you get a small credit on the tax that you have to pay. So there is a certain incentive at time of purchase to declaring homestead. Other than that, you need to file it by April 15th of every year with your taxes.
And what happens if you don't file? So a lot of people are converting filing homestead. So if they don't make that date, when I looked at Vermont statute, I saw that there was something about a penalty of 8%.
So we had a family a few years ago, Meredith, if you remember, and they had been living here as residents, but had not declared homestead. And the BRSU went back to them and told them that they needed to, rectify that inconsistency. And I don't know what happened, but my guess is that when they retroactively filed their homestead after the April 15th deadline, they were subject to that 8% penalty.
So my question is, because when I started to review Vermont statute, And I think the April 15th was extended to July 15th of this year. And so if you have not filed homestead by July 15th, what happens?
Well, the first person who will get it is Celeste, because families are going to be submitting their paperwork to Celeste at the BRSU, and she's specifically looking for that. So if someone has not declared their Vermont homestead, I think she flags that and sends it back to them, right, Randy?
Yeah, she reaches out to them and asks. I think another challenge you've got is that people are purchasing homes right now and not declaring them as their homesteads. So there are people purchasing homes, and I don't know if I don't know who's involved in those discussions, but they're not declaring them as their homesteads right now.
So I guess my biggest question is, if you don't declare homestead by July 15th, how can you get the voucher?
Well, that's what we've talked about in the past. And, my theory is you can't have it both ways. Either you declare homestead and you get the benefit of the tuition reimbursement, or you don't declare homestead, but then you can't really argue that it's your homestead and that you're entitled to the tuition assistance.
Well, right. And so part of what I'm thinking about is, it's with all these people coming in, it is challenging for us to figure out our budget. And so with the rolling deadline, it makes it even more challenging. And I'm not saying they shouldn't come in. They should absolutely come in, but whether or not they receive a voucher is another story, because they still could potentially be enrolled wherever they're coming from, because they have a primary residence somewhere else.
Well, if they have a primary residence somewhere else, then they can't declare residency in Vermont, right? They'd have to change
No,
that.
they have to change it. But the problem is people are still declaring homestead well past July 15th, right? They can come in and tomorrow and fill out the paperwork and have missed the date and still send their kids to.
But then they would fill it out in time for April 15th of next year with their taxes.
So they cannot access the funding, the voucher this year, if they decide all of a sudden they want to send their kids full-time this year?
I don't think that's true. I think if you are a resident of Vermont, you were entitled to the voucher regardless of when you move here. But the deadline for homestead is either when you purchase your property and you declare it on the PTR, or April 15th every year when you file your taxes. So if someone's moving in next week and they declare on the property transfer form that they're homestead, they've done what they need to do.
So what I'm saying is when I look at Stratton's affidavit, which is the next town over, it says, and I quote, "To receive tuition for my pre-K to 12th grader, I'm aware that my homestead declaration must be filed on the first and every subsequent April 15th, that I claim my residency as primary."
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
if I fail to file my homestead with the department, like, they basically say no, it's a no-go for the voucher if you miss the deadline.
So I think that's so for year one, if people haven't, you end up sort of waiting out year one. You can make
end up, when you say end up waiting out year one, they do not receive the voucher.
No, they do, but it's after that. It's in any subsequent years.
Is there any way we could do it for this year?
I do not believe you can under that. I can.
I'm looking at Stratton, how they have it, and it seems that they have it that if you miss the deadline, you miss the deadline.
Yeah, unfortunately, though, the Stratton document is really problematic, and I'm not sure how much weight of law that actually carries.
Mm-hmm.
I have a problem with the language. I have a problem with the way that it's written. I have the statute is the statute. Like, because they wrote this document with these things on it doesn't mean that those things carry the weight of law.
A lot of these things are legally irrelevant.
But I'm not saying that. What I'm simply saying is that What we have is kind of like a rolling admissions thing that makes it very difficult for us to control our taxes, because at any given point, somebody can file homestead. Next week, we could have another 100 people file homestead.
You're right, but there's a constitutional right to travel and change your domicile. I mean, we can't,
Public education.
yeah, we can't throw up
Public
roadblocks.
education, yes, but we can actually control a little bit more. So if I just look, so the problem is when I look at the town that's literally adjacent to us, they have a 7-page document that is, and I understand, Dean, it's really heavy-handed, okay? But what it is it's very onerous, and it makes declaring residency a lot trickier.
My problem with it isn't that it's onerous and heavy-handed. My problem with it is that it's fanciful. It's not real. It doesn't mean anything. There's nothing here like that actually is binding. I mean, the only thing in here, as far as I can tell, that's actually binding is when they cite the actual statute where it determines what residency is. All of that extra stuff is irrelevant.
Yeah. I would agree with Dean. And I mean, the thing is, I mean, let's say that someone, you know, question 14, if this guardian has a dog, is it registered in the town of Stratton? What if the answer is no? We're not going to decline residency based on that. Does the guardian have any local family or close friends? What if the answer is no? We can't decline residency because someone doesn't have friends.
And why do I need your vehicle registration?
Why do you need your vehicle? I think if you live in Vermont, your vehicles are registered in the state of Vermont.
Yeah, but what if I have another vehicle that's registered in another state? It's just not relevant to whether or not.
Why would you have another vehicle that's registered in another state? If this is your primary resident, why would you have a vehicle that's registered in another state, except as a tax deduction?
Because people do that all the time. There's
Why?
people.
Give me an example where that is the case.
Okay, I'll give you one right now. So if I live in New York, that's my primary residence, and I have a second home in Winhall, and I do not want to put undue mileage on my vehicle. I have a second vehicle which stays at my house in Vermont, and I drive it around and do my daily driving when I'm in Vermont in that vehicle. I can give you 50 people that do that. I know,
right.
because
100%. Are they declaring residence in the state of Vermont?
No, but my point is the fact that they have a car registered in another state has no bearing whatsoever on whether or not they're going to get a voucher for their tuition. It's completely irrelevant.
Said who?
Me and the statute.
Well,
no, but it's not, Dean. You're not. See, the problem that I have is that you're saying that it's completely irrelevant. And my issue is that I don't know whether it is or it isn't, but I know that I'm not a lawyer, and I know that I would like to consider, you're basing this off of your interpretation of the statute, and I'm basing it off of my interpretation of the statute. So together, you know, Jen at least is a lawyer, but she's still like is not a specialist in this particular area.
Well, and I'll tell you what, Meredith, much like most of Vermont law, there is not a whole lot of case law interpreting 16 VSA 1075, because I looked. There are precious few cases, and most of them are not on point for, I mean, so this is an undecided area of law.
Right, that's what I figured. So the problem that I have, just before you finish, is that we are adjacent to a K through 12 sending town that has a very stringent affidavit, and we have not a very stringent affidavit.
But I think it goes back to the definition of resident and intent. And I mean, so intent can be either direct. Someone can say, like, I am not planning to be a resident of Vermont. Well, now we have direct evidence that they're not a resident. But short of something, you know, coming out of someone's mouth, then you look at indicia, you know, the indirect evidence, and that gets into, you know, the registration, the, you know, copy of the mortgage, copy of the lease, driver's license, checking account, all of those things. Those are all indirect evidence, and we kind of look at that and say, you know, what indicia of intent do we have for this particular case? And
Right.
that, I mean, that's all we have to go on. And so, I mean, sure, we could argue that whether you have a dog in the town of Stratton is relevant to whether, you know, you're a resident of Stratton. Personally, I don't think that that's a question that we need to be asking. Like, it wouldn't be controlling for me, whatever the answer to that question is. And so, like, I feel like,
I agree. I agree certain questions, but all 7 pages of the questions.
no, I'm not, I don't think any of us are saying that none of this is good. I think I'm just saying that a lot of this is not legally relevant.
So what I'm saying is, what is legally relevant? What is relevant in the eyes of the board that we can make that would be helpful to us to make this process? So, because one of the things that I do like about the affidavit, David, is the intent is there. It shows that, you know, for the intent of residency is there. You know what they're getting at.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I like page, you know, 5, where I certify, you know, all of those certifications. I think that's good. I think, you know, we need to really be clear on the expectation that anyone who is requesting tuition assistance files homestead. And I mean, if you want, we can go through question by question, but I think this is probably unnecessarily onerous as written, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think this is super crazy, but I think that what I do like is, and what I have heard is that people who are looking to buy, and this was heard from more than one person, have looked at this questionnaire and said, you know what, I'm going to buy in Winhall versus Stratton because I really don't want to fill this stuff out. And so, because the voucher is much easier to get in Winhall than it is in Stratton. And the problem is, now we're 2 years into this and the voucher is easier to get in Winhall than it is in Stratton.
To be honest with you, I don't know that it's actually more difficult to get. I don't know how much of this stuff would actually hold up if anyone challenged it. Like,
nobody is going to see it's not about challenging it in court, Dean. It's about the understanding that if I'm going to buy a house, I'm going to buy it in Winhall because I don't have to fill out this 7-page thing. I don't even want to get to the point of legally suing Winhall or legally suing
I'm not talking about it in court. I'm just saying that I don't see why a person couldn't just not fill this out and still get voucher in Stratton.
I don't know if they can or they can't, because I'm not even up to that. What I'm up to right now is all these people moving to Winhall because they don't even want to go down the path of filling it out or not filling it out because it's onerous.
I mean, I don't even know how onerous it is, other than it's 7 pages, but I mean, so it takes you 15 minutes to fill it out instead of, you know, 10.
My recommendation is to look at page 5. I think that that's where you've got the information that actually has some value and some merit, because you as a board can, I don't see how you can deny if people are providing all the rest of the residency, declaration of residency paperwork. I don't see a way, and I am happy, Meredith, to your point, to seek legal counsel on this, that you can deny a family that is sitting here with children who need to be educated from paying for their public education. So,
100%.
But I think that the idea of saying, hey, you might not have completed this as your homestead, you get this year, but our expectation very clearly is that you have filed it by April 15th of next year if you expect to receive any subsequent tuition payments. Because that is, we're looking at that as being a declaration of residency. And I think that all of this gets to that. What have you done? When are you doing it? I understand that if I don't do this, that you're not going to pay for my tuition for my child's education.
Randy, the BRSU has not sent this form out to Winhall families yet, correct?
Well, anybody who, they are still using anybody who's already, yes, anybody who's already gone to a school has received it, I believe, if it's come back to this office.
So like for new families that have moved to the area, are they being given the current version?
Yes, once it comes here. There are many that haven't come here yet that are on this list. So the updated anticipated list that you have does not represent actual paperwork that we've had, because that's a constantly moving target.
If we amend this form that we send to the families, do we have time to do it before the beginning of this school year, or is this something that would be going forward, for next year?
No, I don't see any reason that you couldn't update it at this point, if that's what you decided to do as a board. I'll look into it, but I don't see that there's any reason you can't do that.
Okay, so I'm thinking, if you consult with the BRSU's attorney and kind of get some answers on that, maybe we could, do a quick turnaround and update it as appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And I would recommend that we put in, before we get to the supporting documentation, a question regarding declaration of homestead, and then the certifications that are located on Stratton's page 5 of their affidavit form. Although
Yeah,
I would take out the understand I may be subject to criminal prosecution.
I agree.
yeah, I take that part out too.
Maybe the first 4.
Right.
I would like to kind of also figure out what would, from the BRSU attorney, from the questions, what is his thought?
I can send her the form and ask her for her opinion on it.
Yeah, I'm just curious.
But I think, having people sign the certification, kind of brings back the importance and the gravity of what it is that they're signing. And, if someone is going to request a tuition payment, which, as we've talked about in prior town meetings, ends up being about $20,000 per child by the time it's all said and done. I mean, that's a lot of money that we are, happy to give to residents because this is what we do. That this is what the school board's mission is. But I think that, it's reasonable to expect that if someone is going to request that tuition reimbursement, that they would not find what we're asking them to be unduly onerous.
That's
either
right.
You're a resident or you're not a resident.
That's exactly my thought, where you say this is 15 minutes and I say it's 15 minutes, but other people may pause a little before they sign an affidavit like this.
I don't think necessarily that the questionnaire part of the form is too onerous. I think the supporting document section is probably the thing that's going to be the hardest for people to come up with. I mean, some of the stuff in there, like I said, I think is a little bit ridiculous, but I have no problem whatsoever with adding the bottom half of page 5 of this document with the certifications, obviously accepting the final one. I mean, I have no problem with including that in our own.
But Dean, it's everything that we ask for. The only difference is vehicle registration for all vehicles.
I don't think that's relevant. I don't
Right,
think that
but
needs to be there at all.
everything else on the required personal documents and the property documents are the exact same as what we.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that. So what I'm getting at is, I think that getting those documents together is probably more onerous than filling out this questionnaire.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's all I was saying. I like I said earlier, I don't think that it's unduly onerous. That's not my problem with it. My problem is with its basis in law, whether or not it holds any actual, whether they can actually enforce any of the penalties that they say.
Yep, I think
is onerous.
Right. Well, and also it's who is enforcing the penalty, because the school board clearly is not enforcing anything because they don't have any power to enforce anything.
Then that's my issue. That's my main issue with the document on the whole, is that I don't think that they have the ability to enforce any of the threats that they've issued in here. I think that if someone received this document and really decided that they wanted to push back on it, I think that they would be more than capable of establishing residency under the statute without filling out half of the stuff in here, and that if challenged, they would be able to move forward. Like I just, that's my issue with it. I don't think that it's real. It seems flimsy to me.
So are
Are
we
we?
in agreement? I'm sorry, Dean, what?
No, I was gonna say I think we're ready for a motion. But
Yeah, I was gonna say, so.
I was just going to recommend that as you make the motion, if the motion is going to include those 4 statements, that those are read aloud as well.
Okay, so I'm going to move that we, well, subject to Randy's discussion with the BRSU attorney, I will move that we amend our declaration of residency to include questions regarding the declaration of homestead, and also include at the bottom the following 4 certifications. Well, do you want me to list them out by like?
So what about the first
or
of
just
page?
the first 4 certifications?
hold on a second. Jen, finish your motion and then we can
Yeah.
discuss if we need to.
Okay. The first 4 certifications located on page 5 of the Town of Stratton affidavit.
I do think you should read them out loud because you're looking at it, but other people are here who haven't. And for the record, we should state what
Yeah, thank you.
to.
Okay, so the first certification is I certify that the student's residence within the town of Winhall has not been established solely for the purpose of attending the schools thereof, with a place to initial. The second is I certify that I do not have a principal dwelling place in another town, with a place to initial. The third is I certify that I have intent to maintain a principal dwelling place in the school district indefinitely, place to initial. And then the final one is I certify that I understand the residency requirements and that I know the penalty for fraudulent registration, with a place for initials. Do I have a second?
I second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any discussion?
I guess I'm wondering what the penalty is for fraudulent registration.
Well, we
Or
already.
with that specific language.
Yeah, well, we listed on the current declaration of residency at the bottom. So it says, and I'm reading this from the declaration of residency, but this is coming from, I think it's 13 VSA section 3016. A person who violates the section shall, if the prohibited act results in a loss to any governmental entity or a benefit to the person of $500 or more in value, whether by a single act or by a common scheme or course of conduct involving 1 or more transactions, be imprisoned not more than 5 years or fined not more than $10,000 or both.
I would just recommend that we cite that.
I'd like to keep that on our declaration.
We would, but
Okay.
just even right there where you're certifying that,
Okay,
I
so
would just say,
13 VSA
Yes.
section 3016.
yep,
And I would also like to discuss why questions 1 and 2 from page 5 are not going to be included, because I think that goes back to receive tuition for my pre-K through 12th grader. I am aware that a homestead declaration must be filed on the 1st and every subsequent April 15th that I claim my residence as primary. I understand that no tuition payments will be made for my students if I fail to file homestead.
Wait, I'm sorry, Meredith, where are you?
I'm on page 5.
Okay.
Above the affidavits, the 4
Yep.
certifications.
So I began renting this residence, which I now claim as my primary residence on.
Yes, and then 2, which is I purchased the Winhall residence, which I now claim as my primary residence.
I guess I don't understand why the first one is relevant. Because people are allowed to, change.
Okay, so let's go with 2, which is I purchased the Winhall residence, which I now claim as my primary residence. To receive, I must file homestead on this date. I understand that no tuition payments will be, you know, I filed Vermont Homestead Declaration with the Vermont Department of Taxes.
So personally, I agree that we should include something that says, I'm aware that my homestead declaration must be filed on the 1st and every subsequent April 15th, that I claim my residency as primary with the place to initial.
I'm fine with that.
I think as written, subparagraph B, I understand that no tuition payments will be made for my students if I fail to file my homestead declaration with the Vermont Department of Taxes. Technically, I don't think that's true, because I think, let's say someone who's moved in, I'm just going to pick a date, July 31st, so they missed the July 15th cutoff this year. They declare residency, they get the tuition reimbursement, and next April 15th, they don't file their declaration of residency. They wouldn't get tuition payments for next year, but they would have already have received the tuition payment for this current year.
But what if they had owned their house prior and not purchased the house and had not filed by July 15th this year?
Well, then that goes back to what Celeste is doing at the BRSU, where she's asking people if they have declared their residency or their homestead. And if they haven't, she's gone back to them to say you can't have it both ways. And people who file late and have missed the deadline are subject to that 8% penalty.
Right. Okay. So anybody who files after July 15th is subject to an 8% penalty.
If they owned the property.
They own the property prior to.
Yeah.
That's what.
That is my understanding.
So I think we should explain that in the, I think that should be somewhere in this affidavit. Like, so because I think I understand that if I previously owned the property and I did not file before, April 15th with an asterisk, July 15th, 2020, and that I claim it, I understand that payments I will be responsible for an 8% tax penalty if I take the voucher.
Well, but I think Celeste is stopping, like Celeste is the gatekeeper on that. And
right, but why not just include it? Because they should know.
Yeah, it's not that they wouldn't get the voucher and be subject to the 8%. I mean, they have to file homestead before they get the tuition reimbursement.
Of course, but if they file homestead now, they're subject to an 8% penalty.
Mm-hmm.
And they should know that prior to file, because it's a choice. So some of the people who are coming up, it's one thing if you have an intent to move here. It's another thing if you file homestead only for a year. 8% may be it may be impactful enough to say, hey, I'm only going to do this for a year. I don't really want to pay this extra money. So if we put it, at least if we put it in the form, they'll know.
So add in, I understand that if I don't file my declaration of homestead by April 15th, or, by the statutory deadline as defined by, and we cite the statute, I will be subject to an 8% penalty.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that's abundantly clear right now.
Okay.
I'm
and
in
off
agreement.
the top of my head, I'm sorry, Dean.
No, I'm sorry. I said I'm in agreement. The storm's getting pretty bad here and my internet is getting pretty bad, so I might drop in and out. I'm sorry.
Off the top of my head, I don't know what statutory provision that is, but we can find that out and plug it in.
Thank you. That's all I wanted to kind of explain because that penalty is a penalty and you should know.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so Randy, do you want me to reread the motion as amended in full?
Well, right, we didn't sort of formally amend it, but now it is amended.
So do you want me to move to amend it and I'll go through the total package of what we're doing?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to move that we amend my initial motion so that we are now going to update our declaration of residency, subject to Randy's discussion with the BRSU attorney, so that we will include at the front of it provisions for the declaration of homestead and ask people if they have completed that, and then also include the following 6 places for people to initial. So first, I certify that the student's residence within the town of Winhall has not been established solely for the purpose of attending the schools thereof. Second, I certify that I do not have a principal dwelling place in another town. Third, I certify that I have intent to maintain a principal dwelling place in the school district indefinitely. 4, I certify that I understand the residency requirements and that I know the penalty for fraudulent registration. 5, to receive tuition for my pre-K to 12th grader, I am aware that my homestead declaration must be filed as defined by whatever the statute is, that I claim my residence as primary, and we'll insert that statutory provision. And 6th, I understand that no tuition payments will be made for my student if I fail to file my homestead declaration. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I
6 would be the
understand
penalty.
that if I do not file my homestead declaration in a timely fashion as defined by the statute, I will be subject to an 8% penalty.
Mhm.
Second,
By the state of Vermont, right?
Yes.
not by us.
Right. I just want to make, I think it's important
Yeah.
to add that piece.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Okay. The next item on the agenda is the audit. Randy, I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to bring up.
I didn't. It's really pretty standard. And if you, it's just for you to review. If you have any questions, you can ask Sue. There were
Okay.
no significant findings.
The only thing I would, it's not on the audit, but it's on the what you had sent over, the data.
You're talking to Randy?
Yeah, but I can just wait. I'll wait.
Okay.
Okay. Any board updates?
Yeah, I have one. Emily reached out to me. Emily,
Emily
who
Kribel?
led our community council when we were dealing with our tax rate issues previously. And she just wanted me to talk to you guys and just to let you guys know that she is available and willing to help organize again if we feel that we need a significant community input as far as what action we're going to take regarding the enrollment issue and the tax rate issue. So she just wanted me to let you guys know that she reached out and that she's willing to help organize. She still has the email list from last time if we feel that that's necessary and that we want to engage her on that. So I just wanted to bring that to you guys.
Great. Kind of on a related note, Lissa Stark, who's the town administrator, I've spoken with her and she has an email list where she sends out email blasts. I've been getting like select board meetings and agenda, but I've been asking her to also send out the school board meeting and agenda. People who want to be included on that email blast should email her directly and just ask to be included. But her email address is townadmin@winhall.org. And her name is Lissa, Lissa Stark, Stark. But anyone who's listening who wants to email her, you would just automatically get the agenda as it posts. Well, I send it to her and then she sends it out. All right, agenda items for next meeting. Residency review.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think any updates, any kind of updates on the legislative requests.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Reflection on norms, which, I forgot even to have us review, but I feel like we've internalize them now.
I
So.
miss meeting in person. Zoom is not for me.
Yeah.
I hear you.
Okay, and then our next meeting date is September 15th at 5 p.m.
Do you want to open up for public comment again at the
Oh,
end?
I'm sorry, it's
Yeah.
not on there. Yes, I do.
It was right before the reflection on norms, but.
Oh, sorry. Yes, public comment.
So do you want to just have people kind of unmute themselves if they'd like to say something and introduce themselves? I did mute a couple people during the meeting, so I'll unmute you if I muted you because there was some background noise, a couple people, but everyone's unmuted that I muted.
It's done.
Hey, this is Misty Castellano. I just wanted to introduce myself and just say thank you.
Thank you. How do you spell your last name?
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, CASTELLANO.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Emily Schriebel. And I just want to say thank you guys. I know it's it's an incredible situation we're up against again. And thank you for your energy and creativity. And fingers crossed we can get some help from the legislature.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emily.
Yep.
Anyone else? All right. So next on my list is the next meeting date is September 15th at 5 p.m. I would love to say that we'll be meeting in person, but my suspicion is that it's going to be another Zoom meeting. Do you know, Randy, is it possible that we can do like a go-to meeting format where people can listen in and type in questions, or is there a reason why we're going with this platform?
We don't have a GoToMeeting account through the BRSU.
Okay.
So we have to use a format and a platform that we've got here.
Got it. Okay.
This is Misty. Would it help? I have a Zoom account. I don't know if it would help, but I'm happy to offer that.
We have a Zoom account too, so we just don't have a GoToMeeting account.
Okay.
Thank you, though. All right, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, second. All in favor? Aye.
Hi.
All right, thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.